They were left with nothing but silence, a silence so sharp it seemed to slice through their hearts. When the last of their children drove away, not even glancing back, Maria and Ivan stood in the doorway of their crumbling old house, their eyes following the trail of dust left on the road. For decades, they had poured everything they had into raising a family, working endlessly to make sure there was always food on the table, clothes on their children's backs, and a roof over their heads. And now, at the time of life when love and care should have come back to them, they found themselves forgotten. The telephone no longer rang. The mailbox was empty. Holidays passed in silence. They were alone, stripped of the very purpose that had once defined their days. It was then, in that hollow void of abandonment, that they made the decision that would change everything. If their children no longer needed them, they would build something that needed them more than ever. The choice seemed absurd at first, almost reckless. A broken-down wooden cabin high in the mountains, left to rot by hunters decades ago, its roof collapsing, its windows shattered, its foundation sinking into the earth. Locals said it was cursed, that no one could live there for long, that storms and wolves had claimed it. But when Maria first laid her hands on the old beams, feeling the rough wood beneath her palms, she didn't see decay. She saw potential, a chance to pour her love and strength into something that could grow, something that could respond to care. Ivan, hardened by years of labor in the fields, nodded silently when she spoke of her vision. "We will make this place our paradise," he told her one evening, his voice low but resolute, as the sun set behind the peaks. "If we have no one else, we still have each other. And together, we can do this." The early days were brutal. Rain poured through the holes in the roof, soaking their meager belongings. Cold winds howled through the open windows, and sometimes Maria woke at night trembling, wondering if they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Ivan's hands, once strong, blistered quickly from hours of chopping wood and hauling stone. They had no machines, no modern tools, only their determination and the old ways their grandparents had taught them. Still, with every plank repaired, with every nail hammered into place, the cabin seemed to breathe again. The walls stopped groaning in the wind. The roof, patched with care, began to hold steady. A single lantern lit their evenings, and though shadows danced around them, they found warmth in each other's presence, in the fire that slowly began to glow in their hearth once more. Maria turned the ruined yard into soil for life. She cleared weeds by hand, her fingers bleeding from the thorns, and planted the first seeds she had saved from years past. Ivan built her raised beds from old logs and stones carried up from the mountain stream. The earth resisted at first, hardened by years of neglect, but little by little, shoots of green emerged. The sight of the first sprouting bean made Maria cry with joy, her tears falling into the soil like blessings. "We will eat from this ground," she whispered, holding the tender stem as though it were a newborn child. "This land will be our family now." Seasons changed, and so did they. The cabin, once abandoned and hollow, began to hum with life. Vines crept along the rebuilt walls, flowers Maria planted bloomed in colors that painted the once gray yard. Bees buzzed around hives Ivan constructed, filling the air with their golden hum. The mountain spring was redirected into a small channel that fed a garden pond, where fish soon swam beneath lily pads. Each day brought new struggles, yet also new triumphs, and soon the couple realized that they no longer measured life by the visits or calls of their children. Instead, they measured it by how many sunflowers turned toward the light, how many tomatoes ripened on the vine, how the orchard Ivan planted grew stronger year after year. They never stopped missing their children, it would be impossible. But the pain of abandonment was no longer a wound that bled, it had become a scar that reminded them of the life they once had, and of the strength they had found in each other. Sometimes, on long evenings by the fire, Maria would imagine what she would say if her children returned, that she forgave them, that she no longer expected anything from them, because she and Ivan had created something far more powerful than resentment. They had made a home that no one could take away from them. And word of their transformation began to spread. Hikers who once passed by the ruined cabin now stopped to marvel at the roses climbing its walls, at the orchard heavy with apples, at the laughter of the couple echoing through the valley. Strangers came to call the place, the Paradise Cabin, a miracle grown from nothing. To Maria and Ivan, it wasn't a miracle. It was survival. It was love turned into wood, stone, water, and earth. It was proof that even when abandoned, even when forgotten, the human heart could rebuild itself into something stronger than ever. As winter crept down from the peaks, with snow blanketing the mountain paths, their paradise glowed like a beacon. Smoke curled from the chimney, Warmth filled the rooms, jars of preserved fruits lined the shelves. Wolves howled in the distance, but they no longer brought fear, only reminders that life was all around, wild and untamed. For the first time in years, Maria and Ivan didn't feel abandoned. They belonged, not to children who had forgotten them, but to a home that remembered every nail they hammered, every seed they planted, every tear they shed. The cabin became more than shelter. It was their statement to the world, their answer to betrayal and loneliness, that two human beings, even left behind, could carve paradise out of ruin. And as Maria sat one evening watching the firelight dance on Ivan's weathered face, she realized the truth. "We were never abandoned," she whispered. "We were only redirected here, to where we were meant to be all along." Ivan squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with quiet pride, and for the first time in a long time, they both felt whole. Spring returned to the mountains with a force of renewal that seemed to echo the couple's own transformation. The once barren hillsides around the cabin now carried trails of color, wildflowers stretching like carpets between the pines, fruit trees blossoming in the little orchard Ivan had carved from rock and soil, and the steady hum of bees working tirelessly among them. Every morning, Maria rose before the sun, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of herbal tea she had gathered from the mountain herbs herself. She would sit on the porch of their restored cabin, the same porch that once sagged with decay, and watch the mist rise off the peaks. Beside her, Ivan would sharpen tools or patch nets, his strong hands always busy, always shaping, always building. "Look," Maria would whisper, pointing to the birds gathering twigs in the trees, "even they know this place is alive again." Ivan would nod, and though he rarely spoke much, the pride in his eyes spoke louder than words. But life in the mountains was never gentle for long. The weather tested them constantly, as if the land itself wanted to make sure they were worthy of what they were creating. Torrential rain swept through the valley one summer, threatening to wash away the garden beds Maria had nurtured so carefully. She stood, outside in the storm, holding makeshift barriers of logs and stones with her bare hands while Ivan dug channels through the mud to divert the water. Their bodies ached, their clothes soaked through, yet neither surrendered. When the sun returned days later, they looked out over the land and saw that most of the plants had survived. New shoots even seemed stronger, as if defiance itself had given them life. Maria laughed through her exhaustion. "We are like them," she told Ivan, collapsing into his arms. "The storms cannot destroy us. They only make us grow stronger." The little cabin, once nothing more than broken timber, had by now transformed into a sanctuary. Ivan replaced every rotten beam with wood he cut and seasoned himself. The walls were sealed tight against the cold, and the roof no longer leaked even under heavy snow. Maria filled the interior with warmth, woven rugs she stitched by hand, jars of berries and honey lined neatly in rows, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters, filling the air with scents of mint and lavender. They built extra rooms, not for children who never visited, but for guests who might one day arrive. "This house must never be empty again," Maria declared. "It must always carry laughter, footsteps, voices." Ivan agreed, and together they worked as though they were building for an unseen future they believed in with their whole hearts. And that future came sooner than expected. One afternoon, while gathering wood near the trail, Ivan found a group of exhausted hikers, lost and hungry after straying off their path. He guided them back to the cabin, where Maria welcomed them with warm bread, honey, and herbal tea. The strangers sat by the fire in awe, marveling at how a place once known as cursed could feel like heaven itself. "It's like stepping into another world," one whispered, running their hand along the smooth wooden walls. Word of the couple's generosity spread like wildfire. Travelers began seeking out the cabin, not only for shelter but for the peace it seemed to radiate. Slowly, the ruined house abandoned by all became a beacon in the mountains, a symbol of what could rise when love and willpower met despair. Maria and Ivan never charged a single guest. They asked only that those who came respect the land, help in small ways, stacking firewood, weeding the garden, or repairing a fence. And each person who visited left behind something intangible: gratitude, laughter, stories of the outside world. Soon, the couple discovered that though their children had abandoned them, fate had given them new sons and daughters, carried to them by the winding trails. The cabin no longer echoed with emptiness, it rang with music, voices, and life. Nights that were once silent became nights of storytelling under the stars, as travelers and locals alike gathered around the fire pit Ivan built from stone. Despite the joy, there were still moments of sorrow. At times Maria would sit by the window, watching families embrace before continuing their journeys, and a shadow of sadness would cross her face. "We gave them everything," she whispered one evening, speaking of her own children. Ivan, sitting beside her, placed a hand on hers. "And now we give to the world," he said firmly. "They may have forgotten us, but life has not. Look how much love still comes back to us." His words, simple as they were, carried the truth Maria needed. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and returned to stirring the pot of soup for the guests waiting at their long wooden table. The seasons wove together in a rhythm that became their heartbeat. In spring, the orchards blossomed, covering the mountainside in delicate pinks and whites. In summer, fields of wildflowers surrounded the cabin like a living sea. Autumn brought baskets of apples and jars of golden honey, the fruits of their labor preserved for the long winter nights. And winter, though harsh, brought its own kind of beauty, icicles glittering like glass, the crunch of snow underfoot, and evenings of warmth by the fire as Maria read aloud while Ivan carved figures from wood. Each season, once feared for its hardships, now felt like a gift, a reminder of how deeply they had learned to live. Visitors began calling the cabin by a name of their own, the Mountain Paradise. Some claimed they had never felt peace like it anywhere else, that the very air seemed to heal their spirits. And though Maria and Ivan laughed modestly at such words, deep inside they knew it was true. The land they had nursed back to life had become sacred, not because of magic or miracles, but because of love poured into every seed, every nail, every stone. What had been built with pain had blossomed into joy. What began as a retreat from loneliness had become a refuge for all who found it. Maria often reflected at night, gazing at the stars. "We thought we were abandoned," she whispered once, resting her head on Ivan's shoulder. "But perhaps we were guided. If our children had stayed, we never would have come here. We never would have found this." Ivan nodded, his rough hand clasping hers. "This," he said, gesturing at the glowing hearth, "the blooming orchard outside, the distant laughter of guests, is what we were always meant to create. Not for them, not even for us, for the world." And Maria, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her heart, finally understood that abandonment had not been the end of their story. It had been the beginning. The cabin, the garden, the orchard, the laughter, it all stood as living proof that no one is ever too old, too broken, or too forgotten to build paradise from ruins. And as their story spread beyond the mountain valleys, carried by every traveler who passed through, the legend of the elderly couple who turned loss into life began to inspire countless others who had once felt abandoned, too. For Maria and Ivan, that was the greatest gift of all.